Let me read to you a passage from the 12th chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 1 to 11. It's the Gospel for Monday of Holy Week, Year A. St. John writes, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages." He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. "Leave her alone," Jesus replied. "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well. For on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and putting their faith in him. That was from John chapter 12, verses 1 to 11. And what does it suggest to us? Well, there are several actors on the stage of our gospel scene that I've just read. There is Jesus, there is Lazarus whom Jesus had raised from the dead, and there are Martha and Mary, the sisters of Lazarus. There is also Judas. Finally, there are the crowds and the chief priests. I think we could say that apart from Jesus, the two main ones are Mary, the sister of Lazarus, and Judas, who would betray him. Let us consider what each of these two do in respect to Jesus, and what their actions suggest. The context of our scene is a banquet put on in Jesus' honor, perhaps in the home of Lazarus and his two sisters, for we are told that Martha is serving. Jesus had worked an astounding public miracle, calling his friend Lazarus forth from the tomb, his having been dead for 4 days. Mary enters holding a quantity of pure nard, a very expensive perfume, and goes with it before Jesus. She pours it all out on his feet and wipes his feet with her hair. What is she doing? She is doing all she can to honor him. In her eyes, there is no one like him on earth. He is beyond compare. And in her action, we surely see the action of the church of the ages to come. Jesus Christ is not just the greatest of teachers of religion. He is not just the greatest of the prophets. He is not just the one who has exercised the greatest of miraculous powers. He is the Lord. He is God. God the Son become man, and as such he is to be worshipped. No other man, no other person in all of history is to be worshipped, even though so many have arrogated to themselves this divine prerogative. The full sense of this would come home to his disciples, especially after his resurrection from the dead. And we see the greatest instance of this in the response of Thomas when the risen Christ showed him his wounds. "My Lord and my God," he cried. Our gospel scene that I've just read, occurring not long before his passion, constitutes a pointer to all of that. Mary's action embodies the worship that is due to Christ. By contrast, we have the response of Judas, one of the 12. He had been privileged to be called to be one of Christ's constant companions, to be with him, and to be sent out to preach in his name. Christ had called him to be one of the 12 foundation stones of the church, which would be the bearer of his kingdom. He had been blessed with the unique calling to be an intimate of Christ and to see for himself the grandeur of his person. Mary saw that grandeur. Judas became blind to it. What was the difference between the two? Mary loved Jesus, and Judas had gradually lost his love for him and became culpably blind to who he was. In our gospel scene today, we see how greatly disaffected Judas had become, and we sense also the gentleness and tact with which our Lord had treated this traitor within his own company. At the time of our Lord's announcement of the doctrine of the Eucharist at Capernaum, in John chapter 6, when so many of his disciples left him, our Lord said that one of his chosen was a devil. And John informs us that he was referring to Judas. Judas here, in our gospel passage that I've read, when he sees the perfume being poured over the feet of Christ, he grumbles. He appears to dislike Christ and to resent honor being accorded to him. His attitude, we might say, is an enormity, and it is cloaked in a hypocritical interest in the poor. Christ corrects him and insists on the appropriateness of this action for him in the life of his disciples. This would appear to be the trigger that leads to Judas's final apostasy. The person of Christ is at the center of this scene, and indeed of Christian discipleship. Mary, by her action, exalts Christ's person, and Jesus accepts her action. Judas resents Christ being at the center and criticizes the honor accorded him. By abandoning Christ, he loses everything. In this whole sequence of events, we are surely reminded that Jesus is at the center and at the heart of the world, and that life is to be found not just in his teaching, but more fundamentally in his person. He is the object of our worship and our love, and we show our love and our worship of him by living according to his word. Let us linger in the thought of Mary's action of pouring her most precious nard over the feet of Jesus and wiping them with her hair. That is the attitude we ought bring to all our activities during life. It's in that spirit that we should do everything. All our actions, all our efforts to fulfill our daily duties ought be informed with the attitude of Mary in our scene that I've just read. Whatever we do ought be done for Jesus as the Lord. He is the Lord of our life, and all that we do ought be done in order that he be glorified and honored the more.